So in the last handful of lessons, we've been working on the command line. And truthfully, I find myself using MySQL through the terminal far more than using the various GUI apps that are available. But nonetheless, they can definitely be extremely helpful in some situations, and very likely you'll find that you prefer these over using the command line. So we will take a look at a handful for both Mac and Windows. So if you're a Mac user, easily the most popular two choices will be SQL Pro and also an app called Queryus. Now Queryus is not free, however SQL Pro is, so I'm going to encourage you to download SQL Pro if you're a Mac user, at least at first, so you can get your feet wet and learn how these types of apps work. So we will go ahead and download that. If you are a Windows user instead, there's three choices among many others, but these are the most popular choices when I pulled it recently. The first choice will be Navicat. That's an excellent choice. Many people love that. You can also download MySQL Workbench. At the time of this recording, the current version is 5.2. And the final one will be HeidiSQL. Now, all three of these links will be available in the show links. Okay, so let's jump into SQL Pro. If you are a Windows user, that's okay. They're more or less the same. The buttons might be in a slightly different place, but the functionality will still be there. So I will close this out, and here's our download. Let's go ahead and install that. And for now, I'm just going to drag it to my desktop. So let's go ahead and open this up and learn how we can connect to our database. I will click Open, and the first thing that we're going to see if we switch to full screen is that we have these connections, a standard connection, a socket connection, and we can also connect through SSH. Now, in the case when we are connecting to a local host, we will want to use a socket connection. But if you did not know that ahead of time, you could always type localhost as our host, and if I hit tab, it's going to let you know, hey, I think you mean to use a socket connection. So we'll switch over to the socket tab. We can give this an optional name if we'd like to be able to easily connect to it. We'll say local. And the username, well, we already set this up. Username is root, the password is tuts+. Now we can also choose to connect to a specific database, but I'm not going to worry about that. So I will click connect, and you'll see, yep, we are connected now. So at this point, you won't see any tables or anything, but that's because we haven't selected a database. So let's go and select that practice database from the previous lesson. Now you'll remember if we click on the orders table that we actually did that very quickly, and there's a few things that we could improve. Well, using an app like this makes it really very simple. So notice here that we had fields for the ID, the number, and the user ID. But if you think about it, the number and user ID should never be null. So we should specify that the table should not allow any records where those values are blank or null. So fixing that is as easy as deselecting these options. And behind the scene, that's going to run the necessary SQL command to update the table. Now we can verify that by going up to the console in the top right, and let's expand this just a bit. And if we take a look at this alter command, we're altering the table orders, and we're changing the number to be not null. And that's all there is to it. So let's also take a look. We have this users table, and the same thing, username allow null. We want to specify not null in that case. Now the structure shows us the structure of our tables, but if we switch over to the content tab, that's going to show us the actual content that is within the table. So for our users, we see we have Jeffrey, Jane, and John, but adding a new one, rather than manually writing that insert command, you could just do this. Leave the ID blank, and we'll say Frank Johnson. Run it, and now that's added that new record. Let's check the console, scroll down to the bottom, and there's the command. So even if you're still learning SQL, this can be an excellent way to learn. You can do specific actions, and if you're wondering how to do that with code, well, in this case, we insert it into users, the ID and the username. It set the ID to null because that is a primary key, and it set the username to Frank Johnson. So yeah, that's an excellent way to perform actions and learn how you could write the code to accomplish that. Next, we're going to skip over the Relations tab just for a second. We can view information about the table. You can see the syntax for creating the table, what type of table, stuff like that. And then, of course, the fifth panel is going to be for query, for running regular SQL queries, like select star from users. You can either click the Run All button right here, or I can press Command R. And there we go. Or where ID equals 4, Command R, we're getting the same thing as we would in the terminal. Now let's go back to this Relations tab. And I mentioned in a previous lesson this idea of creating foreign keys and restraints. Now, how exactly does that work? Well, I want you to think about this. Let's view the content. We have these users and we have these orders. Now think about it. If we delete a user, let's say we delete Jeffrey Way, well, in that case, we're going to have some confusion here because we're going to have all of these orders, and many of these orders are connected to my name. So that seems a little weird. We can delete my name, but then we still have orders connected to my account. So clearly that doesn't make sense. What we should find a way to do is, on the condition that my user account is deleted, then it should also delete all orders that are associated with that. Or if the Amazon analogy doesn't work for you, think about it from the point of maybe a to-do list app. You go to this app and you log in. So now I have an account, John Doe. John Doe will create lots of to-do items that he can return to in the future. But then let's say a month down the road, John Doe deletes his account. Well, if we don't delete the tasks that are associated with his account, we'll have all of these ambiguous to-do items that aren't associated with any particular account, and that will muddy up our table. So what we need to be able to do is say, when John Doe deletes this account, also delete any tasks that are associated with that account, or to-do items. And the same thing here with orders and users. When a user is deleted, also delete his orders. So how can we do that? Well, let's test this out. Notice we have these orders that are made to user ID of 2. That is John Doe. Right now, we delete it by hitting the backspace key or delete. And notice if I go back to orders, yep, we still have those. Now our tables aren't syncing quite well enough. So let's go ahead and manually delete those. That's one way you could do it, but that's not the good way. The correct way is to create a foreign key and a constraint. Let's do it now. I'm going to click on the relationships, and we're going to add a new one here. But before we do so, let me clear the console just so you can see the command that is running behind the scenes. Let's add a new foreign key, and we can give this a name, or if we leave it blank, one will be generated for us. So here's what we want to do. We want to say the orders, the user ID on the orders references. What is that reference? Well, remember, the user ID on the orders table will reference the ID on the users table. So that will reference users ID. Now we have these options on update and on delete. And this means, what do you want to have happen when the user row is updated or deleted? In this case, we want to focus on delete. So when the user is deleted, what do we want to have happen to the orders? I'm going to hit cascade, but before we do that, let's view each one. What restrict means is the operation should be restricted. That makes sense. We're saying when you try to delete that user, we can specify, nope, we're not going to allow that to happen. That could be a security problem or a structure problem. We're not going to allow it, so we could restrict it. But that's not what we need in this case. What we need is cascade. And what cascade means is it will delete the row, but then it's also going to delete all rows from the table which it references. So that means it will delete the user, but then it's also going to delete all rows from the orders table that have the same user ID. So I know that's confusing. It's a little difficult to wrap your mind around. Give it a few minutes. If you need to do some research, you can go to mysql.com and you can read the documentation. It'll be blurry until one day it completely clicks. All right, so I will click add, and now you can see it generated a name for us on the orders table, and it specified that the user ID on the orders table references the ID field on the users table. And then we've specified cascade so that when the user is deleted, all orders that are associated with that user will be deleted as well. All right, so now we have our foreign key relationship. Let's click the console, and I want you to see right here, let's expand this just a bit. And now you can see alter table orders, and we're going to add a foreign key. Now we're adding a foreign key of user ID, which references the users table and the ID field. And then on delete, we want to pass the cascade option. That's how you would write that. So now let's see this in practice. We go back to content. All we have is orders related to user ID of 1, which is me. So now when I delete the user, If we did everything right and we set up that foreign constraint, now when I go back to orders, you'll see, yep, deleting the user forced us to delete all the orders as well. So hopefully that made sense. If you need to, go back and watch the video again. But hopefully you can see that, especially when you're first learning, using an app like this can be tremendously helpful. Okay, and that's going to do it for this lesson. So your options are SQL Pro, Queryus, which is quite good as well. On Windows, you can go to Navicat, MySQL Workbench, and Heidi SQL. And as noted earlier in this video, these links will be available in the show notes. My name's Jeffrey Way, and I'll see you in the next lesson.